Mr. President, our House of Commons Select Committee on Foreign Affairs has done some work on Afghanistan, and they've published their report today. They started in July last year, so it's a reasonably thorough piece of work. And they conclude that the surge has not really worked. They also believe that Britain's objectives have effectively been realised. There is no threat to British national security anymore from Afghanistan. Isn't it time actually that we and the Americans brought forward our departure?
I saw this morning. I heard about it yesterday when I was at the House of Commons, but I read the report this morning. It's a thorough one. It's a report that I almost completely agree with.
So we could leave?
That part is different. When I say I agree with the report, I mean that we must adopt more peaceful means for the resolution of the problem. By that I mean that there should be more concentration on reconstruction and training of the Afghan capacity. By agreement I mean that there should be more focus on the sanctuaries outside of Afghanistan. And the part that is the leaving of forces and the return of British and American forces back to their homes is one that has already been agreed upon in a process of transition which will go till 2040, by which time Afghanistan will be taking over completely the responsibility of protection of its people and the protection of the territory. But from that date onwards too, there will be some presence of our allies in Afghanistan for the purposes of training and for any additional continuation of the war on terror.
But if the surge has failed and the military activity remains high, the cost is also very high, not in dollars but in lives. At least 50 civilians killed in NATO actions in just these last few weeks, and also the decapitation of Taliban leadership that you might be able to speak to.
The civilian casualty issue is one of extremely high importance to the Afghan people. This has been the foundation of the tensions we had with our allies. Unfortunately, it continues to take place. As far as the surge is concerned, and the purposes for which the surge has come about, if the surge can address the question of violence in Afghanistan effectively, the Afghan people are for it. If the surge can address the issue of the arrival of extremists into Afghanistan, the Afghan people agree with. But if the surge also means increased likelihood of civilian casualties and trouble for Afghan households, then the Afghan people are definitely not for it. Also, the surge must complement efforts for negotiations, efforts for the ongoing reconciliation process. So the surge implemented in a manner that it brings security to the Afghan people, that it reduces civilian casualties, and that complements and reinforces the peace process is worth working with.
But it isn't achieving that. What it surely is doing is killing off seasoned Taliban leaders, and they're being replaced by thugs who you're not going to be able to negotiate with.
Well, that part I don't know if it is exactly happening that way. We know that some Taliban leaders are being killed, but there too we have our questions. Who is it that we are fighting? Are we fighting terrorists or are we fighting an insurgency? If you're fighting terrorism, then the Afghan people are with the international community in this fight against terrorism, and we know who they are and where they are. But if it is an insurgency, it has an internal dynamic then. In an internal conflict in a country, I don't like to be aided by a foreign force against my own countrymen. So there, the question is entirely different, and we believe that Afghans should be left alone in that regard.
Then the logical thing would be to hear you, as the Afghan president, saying I think the military surge needs to be scaled right down, and we need to get on now with negotiations with our foes.
I have made that very clear to our allies.
And do they accept it?
Some of them do, some of them don't.
Which ones don't?
Well, the military is less inclined to accepting it, but the political side, the civilian side, is more inclined to it.
So as you sit here, would you say that you are in some degree of friction with your allies when it comes to the question of...
Absolutely, yes. We have been at friction for some time. It's only natural that friction should be there. We are in a continuous process of negotiations and evaluation. There's a process of exchange of information and presentation of views on all such issues. Sometimes they agree with us, sometimes they don't, and that's where the friction comes about. But generally...
But forgive me, I mean, British soldiers are dying at this time in which this disagreement about whether the military operation should continue in this way or not.
It isn't entirely as black and white as you and I are talking about it at this point. It is a process in which we began to fight against terrorism in 2002. Now, the first 2 or 3, 4 years of that war on terror were successful and had the full backing of the Afghan people. The trend began to see a movement towards reversing when the question of sanctuaries were not addressed effectively, when the question of the motivational factors and the training and the equipping and the financing of terrorists outside of Afghanistan were not addressed effectively, and when the Afghans began to pay a price for no reason at a war that wasn't, we believed firmly, and we were right about, for a war that could not be won in Afghan villages. And this is a position that I have continuously presented to our allies. So to put it in the solid and defined perspective, we, the Afghan people, are fully cooperative and our allies and will work with in the war on terror, wherever it occurs. We, the Afghan people, would like military operations scaled down in the Afghan villages because that's not where you can defeat terrorism. That is not where you will find terrorism. Now, if the presence of the international forces in Afghanistan is to fight an insurgency in Afghanistan, that presence will not yield the result that we are seeking. That should be an Afghan matter and a matter for a political solution.
Can we ask you then about the political solution? Are you directly in conversation with the Taliban?
We are with some of them, yes.
You personally?
As a government.
How are they going?
Well, the contacts are going on. The contacts don't get to a fixed address, unfortunately, because that address is not there. And the contacts are now being increasingly channeled through the High Council for Peace, which we established in the consequence of the peace jirga. At the same time, there are contacts by our international partners. The effort is to put all the contacts together and to be well informed about them at all levels, our international partners and Afghans, and to mobilize proper resources and political backing through the institutional order that we have set up for it, which is the High Council for Peace.
Are the British and the Americans talking to the same people you are talking to?
There are contacts, but they may not be with the same people that we are talking to.
This sounds like it could lead to confusion.
Not necessarily. There are different elements of negotiations. There's a beginning point, and there's a middle point, and there is an end point.
When is the end point?
Well, I hope that will be soon, but right now we're at quite the beginning point.
So soon means weeks, months, years?
No, it doesn't mean, unfortunately, it doesn't mean weeks. I wish it did. It doesn't mean months. It probably will be 1 or 2 or 3 years.
Can I ask you about Pakistan? Because that, frankly, is where the war on terror is really being fought. An assassination today of the last Christian minister, following on the previous assassination of the governor. How do you read events in Pakistan? Do you see it spiraling out of control?
I see it increasing. I hope it will not be spiraling out of control. Pakistan's stability is vital to the region and to regional stability. Peace in Afghanistan hinges in a dramatic way on success and stability in Pakistan and the cooperation of Pakistan with the peace process in Afghanistan. The killing of the governor of Punjab suggested that, and this incident suggests that, and that is why we must all make sure that it doesn't go further.
This is the point at which the Western forces leave Afghanistan in 2014 and all the hotheads in Pakistan come pouring over your border. Even if you have well-trained forces, you won't be able to deal with that.
Well, by 2014, I hope the Pakistanis and the Afghans, the Americans, the British, and our other allies have made enough progress so that doesn't happen. So the hotheads are not there in the form of the militancies that they are there today, so that the environment politically and with regard to stability as a whole is solidly ready for such transformation. And in the absence of that, of course, the departure of the international forces from Afghanistan will be a disaster for us and for the international community.
The British and Americans, many people around the world have poured billions of dollars into Afghanistan. When are you going to really clamp down on corruption?
There has been a lot of talk of corruption in Afghanistan in the Western media. Much exaggerated.
Well, the Kabul bank?
The Kabul bank is a corrupt case, sure. But so are the banks in the UK, so are the banks in America.
Well, the allegations against your brother in Kandahar?
Wrong. Totally wrong. Absolutely wrong. Politically motivated, I believe. So the banking is a different issue, which is a real issue of corruption, which is a real issue of mismanagement, which is a real issue of looting of money. The management was changed several months ago, and restrictions imposed, and a continuing investigation is there. But on the money that comes from the international community to Afghanistan, and the part of the money that is spent through the Afghan government, the Afghan government will give you account of every penny spent through our system. And you can hold us as the international community, as the taxpayers of our friendly countries, the UK and others, you can hold us responsible for penny to penny of that money on whether it's spent properly or not.
A last question, Mr. President. The WikiLeaks cables disclosed by, the cables disclosed by WikiLeaks, one of them describes you as erratic, emotional, prone to paranoid conspiracy theories. Now, of course, I think any outsider looking in on Afghanistan would be surprised if the president wasn't a victim of these thoughts. But does that describe you?
Emotional, yes.
Erratic?
Erratic, no. You know, we are a nation that has gone through so much suffering, that has gone through so much intervention and invasions, exactly in the form of conspiracies against us. So fearful of wrongdoings by someone around us, yes. Naturally, I mean, we'll be fools if we didn't look around and with suspicion. Emotional, yes, it's the consequence of the history of suffering, and one that's not emotional is, doesn't have the instinct to move forward, doesn't have the motivation to move forward. Emotional, yes, I get quite angry when I see something wrong done to Afghans, or when I'm deliberately misled in one direction or another by those who are supposed to be our allies, or the like of it. Erratic, no, and conspiratorial, of thinking conspiratorial of others, no. Reality, yes, dictates that we have to be cautious. We are we are burnt many times, and we don't want to burn again.
Mr. President, thank you very much for talking to us.